Well, joining me right now, Joyce Vance, former U.S. attorney and an MSNBC legal analyst, and Kate Christobeck. She reports on Trump's criminal cases for the New York Times and has been in the courtroom all week. With a welcome to you both, and thank you for joining me on this Mother's Day holiday. Crucial week ahead for the prosecution, as it could rest its case by the end of the week. So, Kate, sum up for me where the prosecution left that jury before they head back into the courtroom tomorrow morning.
So this past week was an absolute roller coaster. We heard almost 8 hours of testimony from Stormy Daniels, but we also heard from many different records custodians, people who at one point were in the inner circle of the Trump organization, the Trump administration. And so really the jurors are entering tomorrow probably both exhausted from the week that they just had, but also probably they know that the end is near, and they know that the next witness or witnesses are going to be really the cleanup. And I think if this past week was a roller coaster, I think they, buckle up that this week in and of itself that we'll be hearing from Michael Cohen will be even more so.
All right, so Joyce, Stormy Daniels' graphic testimony about what allegedly happened in that Nevada hotel room in 2006. Look, it was likely very gripping for the jury. But how critical was it? And was the defense attempts to poke the holes in her story successful?
Yes, so Stormy Daniels' testimony was critically important because it helped the jury understand the motivation for the crime that the prosecution has charged. It was keeping that story told by that particular person out of the public domain in advance of the 2016 election. And from that perspective, this was incredibly effective testimony because Daniels is a good storyteller and she told a credible story. But whether the jury believes her or not is in many ways less important than understanding that this was why Donald Trump and Michael Cohen and others jumped through the hoops that they did to prevent her from telling it before the election.
And Kate, from what you saw in court, how did Trump comport himself through it all? Because we know the judge was concerned with his cursing during Stormy Daniels' testimony.
Absolutely. This week, we saw a different Trump than I think we've seen previously in this trial. We've been saying throughout this trial that he's been more subdued than his past Manhattan trials. Last week, we really saw more of what we've seen before, where the judge at one point pulled his lawyers aside and instructed them to talk to their client and saying he would not accept that in his courtroom. I think that's a very good preview of potentially what we could see. And I think the judge was probably trying to get in front of what could potentially happen this week when Michael Cohen takes the stand.
And look, despite all the salacious testimony about hotel room trysts and celebrity payoffs, this has long been described as a documents case. And that is where the prosecution ended the week. So, Joyce, has the prosecution clearly shown the jury how the checks, the invoices, the ledgers, how they're all central to the 34 felony counts against Donald Trump?
Yes, so I would break it down a little bit differently and say that the government has clearly met its burden, and I don't think the jury will have any trouble convicting on the misdemeanor counts, that the false business records were created, that everyone involved knew what they were doing and intended to do it. And then there's this separate issue, and this is why Michael Cohen's testimony is so critical, of showing that it was all done for an improper purpose, to aid or conceal another crime. And so Cohen's testimony will weave together the threads from other witnesses, like Hope Hicks, who said that in 2018, Trump acknowledged to her how important it was that the Stormy Daniels story was coming out then, instead of in 2016 in advance of the election. And Cohen will be the linchpin witness, who will show that Trump knew that he was doing this, intended to do it to prevent the story from coming out in advance of the election.
And Michael Cohen, look, he has teased his upcoming testimony. He did it on Thursday before the judge asked him to refrain from publicly discussing the case. Let's take a look at that.
I'm kind of looking forward to it because, again, can't be finished with something unless you start it.
I mean, Kate, Michael Cohen, he already spent a year in prison for paying the hush money payment and other crimes. He's also admitted to lying under oath in the past. Should the prosecution be concerned Michael Cohen may be unpredictable on the stand?
I think that they acknowledge that the unpredictability is a given. I think back to when he testified last year in Trump's civil fraud trial, that one of the prosecutors was actually standing next to me getting into court and then stayed through his testimony. I think that at that point was a dress rehearsal for what we're about to see this week. And at that point, they likely saw what potentially could set him off during his testimony, maybe things that he could work to improve on coming up. And he's been meeting with them constantly to try to prepare his testimony. And so I think any unpredictability is going to be tried to get in front of by all of this preparation.
Yeah, let's pick up on that, Joyce, because, look, he's going to be on the stand for a few days at least. How do you expect both the prosecution and the defense to handle his testimony?
Well, if you're the prosecution, you give Michael Cohen two pieces of advice. You tell him, tell the truth. Only tell the truth. Don't veer off of the truth. And you also tell him, don't let the defense push your buttons on cross-examination. If they want to call you a bad person and talk about things that you've done in the past, continue to tell the truth and do not let them agitate you or get angry. And so that's, I think, the strategy that we'll see. The prosecution will try to get the truth out and put it into the record. The defense will do everything they can to poke holes in that story, and part of their strategy will be to make Cohen angry or excited so that he comes off as less than credible.
Okay, let's all step back for a sec and look at the past 15 days of the trial, right? Here's a review, starting with David Pecker. The jury heard about how the former publisher of the National Enquirer helped pay to stop damaging stories about then-candidate Trump from becoming public. Then came Rona Graff, Trump's former assistant, then Michael Cohen's former banker, Gary Farrow, who set up the account to enable the hush money payment to Stormy Daniels. Then you have Keith Davidson, who testified he was McDougal and Daniels' former lawyer who negotiated their hush money payments. Hope Hicks, Trump's former assistant, and Stormy Daniels, the adult film star, they were each bookended by custodial witnesses. In fact, one whose testimony stood out, Madeleine Westerhout, who's Trump's former executive assistant in the White House. And now we wait for Michael Cohen and one other witness. Joyce, has the prosecution constructed its case in a way that is hard not to find Trump guilty?
Well, look, it's all going to come down to Michael Cohen and whether the jury believes that the government has proven Trump's mens rea, his state of mind. There are elements that the government has to prove for every charge for each of the 34 counts, and they consist of conduct and state of mind. And in a white-collar case like this, a paper records case, that's always the question, because most defendants don't tell someone, at least not a witness who will testify to it, oh, I absolutely did this with the intent to commit a crime. So that has to be pieced together from the circumstantial evidence. Michael Cohen is as close to direct testimony as the prosecution will get here. And that's why it all comes down to, and why we've all been waiting with so much anticipation for this testimony to see how Cohen holds up on the witness stand.
So then you have the prosecution, again, expected to rest its case by the end of the week. Then what happens, Kate? Is it guaranteed the defense will put on their own witnesses? And who might that be? I mean, I know Donald Trump could be one, but wiser heads have suggested, yeah, no way.
Right. We don't know yet what the defense is going to put forward, who they plan to call as witnesses. We know through some of the motions practiced before the trial began that they wanted to call what they believe is an elections law expert who could talk about the case. But the judge has really reined that in. So if they ultimately do go forward with calling this person, they can't go into the level of detail that they hope to go into with him. And they really have to kind of stick to really broad facts. So it's unknown what they're going to do. It's also a huge question mark, as you said, as to whether he is going to testify. So I think once the prosecution rests, which potentially could happen at the end of this week, we will certainly hear more about what the defense plans to do as part of their case.
Okay, Kate Christobeck and Joyce Vance, always a pleasure to have you both on this show. So